The static came at precisely 2:17 a.m. Mia had been monitoring the station's comm system for weeks, logging the usual interstellar chatter, dull reports from nearby mining outposts, weather forecasts for terraformed colonies, and the occasional garbled signal from deep space. But this wasn't any of those. "Help. Us." The voice crackled faintly through the noise. Mia's fingers froze over the console. The transmission was faint, fractured, like it had traveled an impossible distance. She leaned in closer, her heart pounding. "Can you repeat that?" "Identify yourself," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Static. Then, don't let them." The signal cut abruptly, replaced by a shrill whine that made Mia wince. She killed the audio feed and sat back staring at the now silent screen. A notification blinked at the edge of her console. Source unknown. Origin classified. Classified? That made no sense. Mia worked on Outpost Theta 9, a low-priority research station on the edge of known space. Nothing classified ever happened here. Her gaze drifted to the viewport. The vast expanse of the galaxy stretched before her, glittering stars and swirling nebulas filling the darkness. But something felt off. The stars seemed colder, dimmer. "System, analyze the signal," she commanded, her voice cutting through the eerie silence. The AI responded instantly. Signal integrity 62%. Origin traces to uncharted coordinates. Timestamp indicates origin transmission time, 14 hours, 37 minutes ago. Timestamp? Mia frowned. That couldn't be right. The signal had just arrived. Her fingers danced across the console as she pulled up the station logs. The signal's arrival was logged with today's date, but the timestamp suggested it was sent decades ago. Her pulse quickened. Decades. Before she could process it further, the station lights flickered. A deep hum reverberated through the walls, and for a brief moment, the entire outpost seemed to shudder. "System, report anomaly," Mia barked. "Gravitational fluctuation detected. Origin proximate to signal source." A chill crawled down her spine. Gravitational fluctuations weren't just rare, they were dangerous. They meant something massive, something unnatural, was nearby. Mia pulled up the coordinates tied to the signal. A black, empty void appeared on the map. No stars, no planets, no debris. Just nothingness. Except, not quite nothing. The void shimmered faintly on her screen, as though her instruments were trying to detect something just out of reach. "System, zoom in on coordinates," she whispered. The screen obeyed, magnifying the void. A faint ripple coursed through the blackness, like a drop falling into still water. It pulsed rhythmic and hypnotic, and then the ripple expanded. Mia's console flared with red alerts as the outpost began to shake violently. The viewport dimmed, and outside, the stars themselves seemed to distort, warping and twisting like oil on water. Her comm unit crackled again, the static louder this time. "Mia." She froze. The voice was clearer now, familiar even. It was her own. The voice shattered her resolve. Hearing her own name spoken in her voice, it was like staring into a mirror that didn't belong. Mia's breath came in sharp bursts as she struggled to process what she'd just heard. "System, replay the last transmission," she ordered, her voice cracking. Unable to comply. Signal integrity compromised. Her frustration boiled over, and she slammed her fist onto the console. The outpost lights flickered again, casting long, jagged shadows across the control room. The shadows seemed to linger just a fraction too long before fading. Taking a deep breath, she focused on the viewport. The ripple in the void had grown, undulating like a heartbeat. It wasn't just gravitational, it was alive. "System, analyze the anomaly," she demanded, hoping for answers. "Analyzing an anomaly appears to emit tachyon particles consistent with temporal displacement." Temporal displacement. The word sent a jolt of ice down her spine. Time itself was bending. Mia's training had touched on the concept, but it was theoretical, impossible to replicate under controlled conditions. Tachyons were a fleeting anomaly, barely measurable even by advanced tech. But now they were here, in overwhelming quantities. The console beeped, interrupting her thoughts. A new alert had appeared, flashing ominously. Warning: temporal interference detected. System malfunction imminent. She had seconds, maybe minutes, to act. Grabbing her datapad, Mia initiated a manual backup of the station's logs. Whatever was happening, she needed a record of it. As the data transferred, the comm crackled to life again. This time, the voice was layered as though multiple versions of her were speaking at once. "Don't let it consume you. The threads are breaking. We're breaking." The voice trailed off into static, but Mia's hands shook as she clutched the console for support. The threads. What threads? The ripple outside had expanded into a gaping void. It wasn't empty anymore. Faint shapes swirled within it, flickering in and out of existence like fading memories. She squinted, and for the briefest moment she swore she saw the station itself reflected back at her, only older, battered, and drifting aimlessly in the blackness. And then, a figure appeared. It was small at first, just a dot within the void. But as it drew closer, its form solidified, a humanoid silhouette, cloaked in shadows that seemed to ripple like the anomaly itself. Mia's instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. Her body was locked in place as the figure reached the edge of the viewport. It didn't knock, didn't try to enter. It just stood there, staring with eyes that glowed faintly, like dying embers. Her comm buzzed again, the voice low and fragmented. "Don't look away." The words were a command, sharp and final. She didn't want to obey, but something compelled her to hold its gaze. The figure raised a hand and pointed directly at her, and then, as if time itself fractured, her surroundings blurred and shifted. The hum of the station faded into silence, replaced by a crushing emptiness. She was no longer in the control room. She stood in the middle of the void. All around her, threads of light crisscrossed like the web of a spider. They pulsed faintly, glowing with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Each thread shimmered with images, moments from her life, fragments of memories she couldn't place. And then she saw it, one of the threads snapping. It unraveled quickly, the light fading into darkness. The void trembled as more threads began to unravel, their glow dimming into nothingness. "Mia." The voice was back, louder now, but this time it didn't come from the comm. It came from the figure standing among the threads, holding one in its hand. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the figure holding the glowing thread. Its features were obscured by shadow, but the eyes burned brighter now, piercing through the void. "This is what you've done," it said, the voice an unsettling blend of hers and something far older. "What I've done," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. She glanced at the web of threads stretching infinitely in every direction. More were unraveling, their light fading like dying stars. The figure stepped closer, the thread in its hand twitching like it was alive. "Every choice, every experiment, every ripple you ignored, you've torn the fabric of time." Mia shook her head, stumbling back. "Number, that's not possible. I haven't done anything. You listened to the signal." The figure's voice was cold, final. "You opened the gate." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The signal, the one she'd traced and amplified, wasn't just a transmission, it was a key, a doorway. And she'd turned the lock. Her mind raced, trying to recall her actions. She'd been so focused on identifying the source, on understanding the anomaly, that she hadn't considered the consequences. The figure extended the thread toward her. Images flickered along its length, her in the control room, replaying the transmission. The lights flickering, the void expanding. "This is your thread," it said, "and it's breaking." "No!" Mia reached out instinctively, but the figure pulled it back. "You can't fix this. You can only choose." "Choose?" Her voice cracked. "Choose what?" The figure gestured to the web of threads around them. "The threads are collapsing. Time is unraveling. You can save your thread or you can save the rest." Mia's knees threatened to buckle. Save herself or everything else? It was an impossible choice. If I save the others, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens to me? The figure tilted its head, the glowing eyes dimming slightly. You'll cease to exist. Her heart pounded in her chest. And if I save myself? The figure's voice grew colder. The threads will continue to unravel until there's nothing left. No time, no reality. Just this. It gestured to the void. Mia's legs gave out, and she dropped to her knees, staring at the glowing threads around her. Memories flickered in their light, her childhood, her training, the night spent alone on the station. Every moment felt fragile now, like glass about to shatter. She looked up at the figure, tears streaming down her face. Why me? Why is this my choice? Because you listened, it said simply. You made the first ripple. The void trembled violently now, the remaining threads vibrating like plucked strings. Mia realized she didn't have much time left. Her eyes darted to the thread in the figure's hand, her thread. Its glow was faint, flickering like a candle in a storm. She wanted to hold on to it, to preserve everything she'd ever been. But then her gaze shifted to the other threads, the infinite web of lives, moments, and possibilities. She took a deep breath and stood, her legs shaking but her resolve firm. I'll save the rest, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. The figure nodded slowly and the thread in its hand dissolved into the void. The remaining threads glowed brighter for a moment, as if acknowledging her sacrifice. The void began to close in around her, the web of light collapsing and folding into itself. Mia felt her body fading, her senses dulling. The last thing she saw was the figure watching her, its glowing eyes softening. Thank you, it whispered, its voice no longer cold but almost human. And then there was nothing. Outpost Theta 9 was found decades later, orbiting the void where the anomaly had once been. The station was abandoned, its systems fried, but its logs remained intact. Among the recordings was a single garbled transmission, a faint voice barely audible through the static. Don't let it